Hello.
Good morning.
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 Pleasure, honor to see you guys again. Thank you for inviting me. Came ye yonder from Stanford. Is that the right usage of it? I'm not sure. What I'll talk for a few minutes now, and then in the afternoon a little bit more about wisdom and its applications to relationships, both close personal relationships and working relationships. And probably to get us off the ground, let's go for the mandatory Trump joke. Trump and his wife are walking on a beach, and they open a bottle. Genie comes out, and the genie says, "I'll give you one wish." And Trump, of course, immediately blurts out, the genie asks, "I'll give you infinite money or infinite wisdom." And Trump says, "I'll take the money." And the genie snaps his fingers. I'm sorry, actually Trump surprisingly says, "I'll take the wisdom." And the genie snaps his fingers, and you see a gleam of wisdom in Trump's eye. As a novel concept. And he pauses, thinks, and you see a glow of wisdom around him, and he says, "Dang, I should have taken the money." And the genie feels bad, and then so he turns to his wife and says, "Well, why don't I give you another wish? Is there anything you want?" And she says, "Well, what about Middle East peace? Peace in the Middle East, that would be nice." And the genie says, "You know, thousands of years of conflict, there's all the religious wars, there's the Jerusalem problem, anything else?" She says, "Actually, there is something else I was hoping for. Could you, if I had to have one wish, how about having Donald finally understand women?" And the genie says, "What was that about Jerusalem again?" So, in talking about one of the applications to wisdom in relationships, I thought it would be nice to start us off the passage in Corinthians on love. And so I'll read it, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the wisdom skills, and then go back to the passage and talk about why it's easier said than done. It's active skill building and taking responsibility for practicing those skills. And so the passage itself: love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous or envious. Love does not boast and is not arrogant. It is not rude, it is not self-serving. It is not easily angered or resentful. It is not glad about injustice or wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It is wise and always ready to forgive, to trust, to hope, and to endure whatever comes. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. There's a lot of beauty and depth in that passage. In talking about the wisdom skills, in some things like mindfulness, being present, rather than our mind wandering to the future with anxiety or to the past with regret, with low forgiveness, or empathy or compassion, so transcending ourselves, part of what Gregory was talking about in terms of if it's just about us and our skill building and our happiness, that's doesn't take us very far. So once we're satisfying some of our needs, to what extent can we get beyond ourselves? So empathy and compassion are good practices and are delineated as among those wisdom skills explicitly for that. How do we practice some of those things? So for example, right now as we're talking mindfulness, some of us could be thinking, yeah, this is all nice and good, but what kind of snacks are we having later? So that's okay. The mind wanders. Bring your attention back into the room. So that's a 5-second mindfulness practice. Empathy, compassion when we're at Starbucks. You're in line, 10 people in front of you, the line is moving painfully slow. We're all trying to self-medicate here with caffeine. So to note that there's other people that are also wanting their coffee, and better yet, I wonder what it feels like to be the cashier right now, where 10 of us are in line complaining that it's not moving fast enough. That's got to be tough. And she's trying to be of service to us. And so that's a good 30-second empathy practice. So rather than wait till we go on retreats or do anything fancy with candles or mantras, or it's right there all around us every day, right, to practice these skills. And so those are 2 or 3 of among them. Gratitude is another one, obviously, and so to be grateful for being here today, to be in the company of kindness and goodwill, to be grateful that we were able to see and hear clean water coming out of our faucet, and on and on and on, right? So there's so many things. It's a long, long list. When I do this exercise sometimes with folks, and I actually give them a sheet of paper, here are some, just list of everything you can think of that you're grateful for. So family, health, and so on makes it in the top 5 usually, and some other things in the top 10. And after about 10, 15 items, you see a lot of this. Like, it actually becomes difficult to think about more than 10 or 15 things that we're grateful for when there's 10,000 things to be grateful for. But it attributes to how little we practice that. So we take things for granted, right? We habituate to it, and that's okay. I mean, it seems like nature has given us the ability to habituate. We can't focus on everything all the time. But the downside of that, of focusing on just things that seem relevant right now, is also we forget the good things we have. So the antidote for that, to dishabituate, is to bring gratitude to practice. And that's why it works so well, and some very wise people for thousands of years have thought about clever ways of getting us to practice that in high frequency. So, right, so if we want to practice it in high frequency and not forget the good things we have, how about doing it every time? Let's see, what do we do every day? We eat 3 times a day. Good opportunity. So we know if you do that, at least 3 times a day, we're practicing some gratitude. And eating is a nice shared experience with others, so that's also some ego transcendence. There's also some empathy and compassion that goes with that. I suppose a long time ago they could have done it with any other experience we do a few times a day. But somehow, you know, gratitude for other things, it has a shared experience that's a positive thing. And so that's one piece of it. Emotional intelligence is another piece. When you find yourself getting frustrated or irritated, to what extent are you able to catch that early on? You realize your breathing is getting faster. It's going from your diaphragm, relaxation breathing, to your chest breathing. It's getting there. You find your voice getting louder. You find your palms getting sweatier. So to what extent do we get really good at that? And if we get really good at it, we catch the anger here, frustration, irritation, before it gets anger, before we start yelling at someone, right? Before we start calling people names, including ourselves sometimes. Because we're upset at ourselves too. So self-compassion is often not spoken enough about. Because if we're not even compassionate to ourselves, if we're harsh on ourselves, it's not going to be that hard to be harsh to somebody else. So these are the practices, and it can be done in high frequency. And by high frequency, I mean literally hundreds of times a day, every opportunity at every turn, in traffic, in Starbucks lines, supermarket lines, in frustrating experiences when we don't get what we want. Someone once said about wisdom is, wisdom is actually what you get when you don't get what you want. So that's a reminder. Something frustrating just happened. It's like, oh, wait a minute, opportunity to practice. That could be the very next stop. So then that's how we get to high frequency practice. It's pure practice skills, right? The old joke about the visitor to New York walking around asking for directions to Carnegie Hall. And of course, the native New Yorker said, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And of course, the native New Yorker says, practice, practice, practice. So So let's go back to the passage. And so we named 4 or 5 of these skills. Love is patient. All right? It's like, yeah, patience. How long is that going to take? That in and of itself is a practice. Love is kind. Being kind. That's an interesting practice in itself. And I appreciated Gregory's evoking the Maslow's hierarchy, because when you're at your lowest needs, it's hard to be kind to others. It's hard to be of service to others when we're in survival mode. When we're like this, or we're in fight-flight. So learning how to get out of that, learning not to, and what does it take to get out of that? In part, it's highly fear-based. What am I not getting? Will I have enough? Will I be loved? Will I keep my job? Excuse me, will my health be okay? A lot of self-based fears. There's techniques for reducing those fears. Without doing that, it's not very realistic to be very kind to others if we're in deep fear for ourselves. It's possible, but it's asking a lot. So that becomes a very straightforward, practical technique. If you want to be kind to others and empathic, compassionate, lower your own fears. And where do our fears come from? There's a lot of assumptions we make about the world. If this and so doesn't happen, it'll be horrible. If I lose my job, it'll be catastrophic. Probably not. And so we can start looking at that and start getting more realistic. It could be a pain, it could be uncomfortable, but probably not catastrophic. Or that shouldn't happen to me. And we start looking around the world, there's a lot of suffering in the world. Why wouldn't we be among those that suffer to some extent? That's part of the world. And in fact, a lot of people have it a lot worse than we do. So we shift from that should or must, and we go to more realistic thinking. So that's what I mean by realism. The so-called a dozen or so cognitive distortions. And we have a handout. I guess this could be part of the promo for the afternoon. You'll get that. You only get the handout if you come to the afternoon. No, we may have it for you if you can't stay. But it has a list of the so-called cognitive distortions on one side that most of us fall into. All or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, fortune-telling, mind-reading. These kinds of ways of thinking that often are associated with a lot of stress, anxiety, anger. If we get really good at catching those, we lose half our stress and anger right there. And if we lose that and we get out of fight-flight, Maslow's hierarchy that Barry talked about, now we rise up the hierarchy, now we have more space to do for others. So it's a really good strategy. It's a win-win for us, it's a win for others. So we got to patient, kind. We're only 2 out of about 20 into this passage. So you're getting the gist of this. We're not going to have time to go through all of this, but the next one is love is not jealous. Okay, that's a trick. How to not be jealous of other people's time or money or love. So if your partner seems to be connecting with somebody else, ooh, what does that mean for me? Am I loved less? Am I going to fare well? Will they love me as much if they love somebody else too? So there's all sorts of assumptions we're making, being okay with ourselves rather than looking for others. That can help the jealousy. Being envious. It's not jealous or envious. Another one that's easier said than done, right? And so what's the antidote for that? Gratitude is a good start. So if we're so grateful that we're just alive today, and we got up in the morning, and we have clean water, and we have good friends, and like each other, being able to be here even today, we're too busy being grateful to be too envious. And so that starts competing with being envious. Again, this habituates to all the good things we have. Anything else we get today or tomorrow, it's great to be ambitious. I'm very ambitious in lots of ways. But if none of that happens, that's okay too. While we work very hard to make them happen. They're both simultaneously possible. And so that can deal with the envious part. Arrogance, part of the wisdom skill of humility. And that's a deeper one I'll talk more about in the afternoon, but the idea that our perception is just tentative. Did anybody change their mind about anything in the last 10 years or so? 10 seconds.
You're right.
About politics, say. So there's no reason to think why that won't keep going. And so when we perceive something, someone did something wrong, or something is not good enough, or something will be bad for me, maybe, or maybe we may see it differently in a month, or in 10 seconds, or in a year. And so there's a deep sense of humility around that. Another aspect of humility is recognizing that others see it differently. So just because we see it one way, that doesn't mean it's the way of seeing anything, right? And the third one is a deep sense of awe. There are things, the last 45 minutes in here, we've appealed to multiple things that are much bigger than ourselves. And that's, there's a transcendence aspect to that that's invaluable. And let's not take ourselves too seriously. While we still respect ourselves and others, there's things much bigger than ourselves that we're barely even beginning to understand. And many things we probably will never understand. All right, let's take a deep breath around that. And then still move forward and do the best we can and understand what we can. And so there's a sense of humility to bring to that. And when we say love does not boast and is not arrogant, we can use some of that. It's not rude or self-serving. We live in a society. Anyone get frustrated in traffic? Just me now. So, there's an option that we have in traffic to, rather than curse the traffic, and I'm sure we can go around the room and get some colorful phrases that some people say in the midst of traffic. It's an opportunity. Okay, I have 10 more minutes on the road. Coming here today, actually, my aim was around 9:15, and there was an accident on the 680 coming down from down south. And so my first response could be, oh, can't believe it, going to be late. That's a highly self-serving response, right? The self-centeredness around that is so high. Rather than, okay, I made an effort to do that, and maybe I could have left a little earlier in case there was an accident, so owning up that responsibility. But more than anything else, it was an accident, and I wonder how that person's doing. Because that person's having a lot worse day than any of us right now. And so every time I hear a siren, actually, when I'm around Stanford quite a bit, and around Stanford they're bringing people in all the time with ambulances. So every couple of hours you hear a siren. When I hear a siren, to me that's an immediate cue for appreciation and gratitude practice. Somebody's having a really bad day today. So empathy, gratitude, that's an opportunity for all that. Love, it's not about injustice or wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. There's a lot to say about that. And it's wise and always ready to forgive. In a couple of weeks, Fred Luskin, a really good friend of mine from Stanford, is going to come and talk about forgiveness. And it's a whole deep area in itself, and it has aspects of humility to it. He's going to talk about it from several very practical points of view. And one of the things that overlap between his model and mine, our approaches, is noticing forgiving. It's nice to have the practice of forgiving in and of itself, forgiving. Humility can bring a lot to forgiveness, because notice one of the assumptions, should I forgive or shouldn't I forgive? Because I know I'm right, and they're so wrong. But I'm such a nice guy, I'll forgive him anyway. Right? So there's a hint of arrogance to that, rather than who knows how this thing goes, and who knows what led them to do what they're doing. Maybe a lot of pain, maybe a lot of suffering that I didn't have. So taking a deep breath around that and bringing some humility to it and saying, okay, I don't like what they did, and I know what toxic coworkers look like and feel like, but I'm also judging them from something I may be misleadingly thinking is an omniscient point of view, when it's just a very limited point of view. And so deeply acknowledging that is helpful. And so we do that, and we bring some humility to that table, despite deep frustration of someone that wronged us, or did something we didn't like, and so on. Particularly, let's say, someone close to us, a family member, or a work partner, or a life partner. And so that can help a lot in terms of forgiveness. Trust. It is wise and always ready to forgive, to trust, to hope. Trust is an interesting one. Some part of trust is realistic. If somebody keeps telling you they're doing one thing and they're doing something else, there's good reason not to trust their word. It's statistically correct. On the other hand, there's a piece of trust that also has to do with a core belief about the world. Is the world a safe place? Are people generally good? And if our belief is that, then we'll generally have trust as a default, unless people prove otherwise. And there's people that do a lot to prove otherwise. But many people cooperate, and many people are kind. And so to what extent can we bring trust to a relationship? And so we'll talk more about it in the afternoon. And then things like it bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. So hope, optimism, resilience. That's something that's not easy, and there's got to be strategies and techniques and skills for increasing resilience, for increasing optimism. And again, in a way that's realistic. All of this aims towards realism. It's not to do it because it's a good thing. It's not to do it because it's my spiritual practice necessarily, even though they do guide us to good directions. It's to do it because it's like gravity. To be more empathic and more mindful is just simply more realistic. It's more present, more aware of what the other person's feeling, more aware of our own fears, more practice in terms of the system as a whole. So the beauty of all of this is it's all mutually consistent. As we get more skilled, it's also more transcendent, it's also more helpful to others, it's also more healthy to ourselves. There's no cost to it, it's a win-win. And so in the afternoon we'll go more into specific kinds of relationships, dynamics. I'll take questions from you guys, brainstorm this together, and talk about a few examples from my life, some recent ones in terms of application of some of this. So it will be much more applied and interactive. So thank you for your attention. I'll see you guys in the afternoon.
Okay.